It was tragically too late to save him. His young body had endured so much before the world came to know of the abuse he faced. It's a deeply saddening end to a life that should have been filled with happiness and love. At just 10 years old, he was a small figure, standing only 4 feet 6 inches tall and weighing a mere 77 pounds, when his life was cruelly taken away by his mother and her boyfriend. Fate is too cruel sometimes, and it shows no mercy even to the most innocent of children. This is the case of Anthony Ávalos, who was born on a sunny day in Los Angeles. His parents, Heather and Victor, were young and full of love, but here they are, starting a family. Anthony is the oldest of a bunch of kids. He has 6 half-siblings: Destiny, Raphael, Angel, Noah, Bella, and David. Their house is always noisy and fun, with everyone running around. Now his dad, Victor, works with buildings and stuff, but he has to go to Mexico for his job. This means he's not home much, but guess what? He still keeps in touch with the family through video calls. It's not the same as being there, but it's something. Meanwhile, Anthony's mom, Heather, has her hands full. She's working at a Subway, trying to make enough money for the family and caring for everyone. It's tough, but she's doing her best. She settled into a cluttered apartment off Challenger Way in Lancaster, California, where she raised Anthony and his siblings. Aunt Maria Barron fondly recalled Anthony as an affectionate child who loved cuddles. He had a strong work ethic and enjoyed dancing, often bonding with Uncle David over football games, especially when rooting for the Cowboys. Some of his cherished pastimes were trips to the park and gaming sessions, and he always savored his mama's homemade pupusas. Meanwhile, Heather, Anthony's mother, had a difficult upbringing. Raised alongside older siblings Crystal and David, she faced adversity after her mother, Wendy, left her father when Heather was just 4. Wendy later married Roger Brown, a former convict she corresponded with while he was in prison. Despite initially concealing his criminal history, Wendy eventually revealed the truth. According to Heather, she and her sister endured repeated assaults from their stepfather. Despite these hardships, Heather continued to entrust Anthony to Roger's care occasionally, believing her son was safe with him. However, tragedy struck when Anthony, aged 4, disclosed to a health clinic that he had experienced inappropriate touching within the family. Calls to the California hotline prompted the Department of Children and Family Services (DCFS) to investigate. Records revealed that investigators confirmed misconduct had taken place. However, they did not establish ongoing supervision or counseling despite this finding. This decision was made after Anthony's mother assured authorities that she would seek help for him and ensure he remained away from the individual who had harmed him. Tragically, this assurance did not prevent further tragedy after Anthony turned 6. Anthony's aunt, Crystal, confided in her therapist about Heather's abuse towards her nephew, alleging beatings and confinement without access to basic necessities. As a mandated reporter, the therapist promptly contacted the hotline on April 29, 2014, to relay this information. The Department of Children and Family Services intervened after taking the call seriously, with Anthony corroborating the account during an interview at his school. Further interviews with Anthony revealed that his mother had not sought counseling for him. Consequently, Anthony began displaying inappropriate behavior, a common occurrence among victims of abuse. Additionally, his siblings disclosed instances of Heather's physical abuse. The Department of Children and Family Services caseworkers determined neglect within the household and referred the family to the department's voluntary family maintenance program. Despite typically catering to low-risk cases, Anthony was placed into the program even though he was considered high risk. Unfortunately, there was often no judicial oversight or legal representation to advocate for the child's best interests. This decision mirrored the case of Gabriel Fernandez, who was placed in the same program despite being considered very high risk. Matthew Mansfield, a seasoned Department of Children and Family Services supervisor, oversaw Anthony's case, along with colleague Mark Millman. They enlisted counselors from the Children's Center of the Antelope Valley to support Heather and her children. According to counselor Luis Ramirez, Heather's ability to care for her children was severely hindered by her poor parenting skills, judgment, denial, and lack of awareness of her mental health issues. Heather had a history of depression, possibly even postpartum, as reported by relatives. Heather exhibited symptoms of mental distress, including crying spells, feelings of emptiness, and a sense of disconnection from her children. However, these were not typical blues, but rather violent outbursts of aggression, seemingly triggered by the slightest provocation. She would lash out at her children using whatever object was within reach: a wooden spoon, a ping-pong paddle, a belt, shoes, or even a hanger. When confronted by her siblings about her mistreatment of her kids, Heather dismissed their concerns, insisting that how she disciplined her children was her own business. Despite her evident mental and emotional issues, Heather continued to have more children, adding to her already strained household. By the age of 24, she had 4 children and was pregnant again. Unfortunately, caseworkers in Los Angeles County failed to take Anthony's situation seriously. They refused to remove him from Heather's care, even after he exhibited troubling signs, such as writing a note threatening self-harm, showing up at school with facial wounds from a BB gun, and disclosing to his teacher that his mother was hurting him. Wendy Wright, another counselor at the Children's Center who had spent considerable time with Anthony and his mother, took action by calling the hotline on October 14th. She reported an incident where Heather violently grabbed one of Anthony's siblings and dragged them across the room, further highlighting the urgent need for intervention. Heather consistently spoke about her children in derogatory terms and displayed nothing but anger towards them, as reported by Miss Wright to the hotline operator. However, when Miss Wright reached out to Mark Millman, the response was slow and ineffective. Sadly, her concerns were later dismissed as unsubstantiated. During her observations at the Children's Center, Miss Wright witnessed nothing but anger and emotional abuse towards the children. Shane Bulkley, another DCFS worker, documented Heather's aggressive behavior, including cursing, yelling, and admitting to hitting her kids with a belt. Despite this, Mark Millman justified Heather's actions, stating she was doing all she could given the children's age and behavior. On November 5, 2014, yet another therapist, Crystal G., called the hotline to report a child's disclosure of abuse. However, Mark Millman's follow-up with Miss G was brief. Despite Anthony's high-risk evaluation, Shane Bulkley and his supervisor closed the investigation, claiming lack of evidence. By the end of 2014, Mark Millman and his supervisor, Matthew Mansfield, replaced the Children's Center with Hathaway Sycamore's Child and Family Services. This agency, which had previously been involved in Gabriel Fernandez's case, assigned Barbara Dixon to Anthony's case. The timing of this change raised suspicion, with Crystal G. considering it highly unusual. Barbara Dixon's involvement was questionable, given her failure in Gabriel's case. Her testimony during Gabriel's criminal case in 2017 shed light on her inadequate handling of his situation. Barbara claimed to have witnessed extensive injuries but failed to report them to the hotline, despite state law requiring such action. In exchange for her testimony, she was granted immunity, allowing her to keep her job and manage cases of vulnerable children, including Anthony. However, Barbara's focus was misdirected. Instead of addressing Heather's abusive behavior, she counseled Anthony to be more obedient to his mother and complete his homework. This approach reflects a disturbing lack of understanding of the dynamics of abuse. Barbara's notes from February 2015 to January 2016 depicted Anthony as prone to whining, crying, and tantrums, which she labeled as difficult parenting. Yet, her notes lacked accuracy and failed to document new allegations of abuse received during her tenure. In April 2015, Heather's brother introduced her to Kareem Ernesto Leiva, with whom she began a relationship. This relationship would eventually lead to more children. The family dynamic was complex, with Anthony's father being Victor Ávalos, while Destiny, Raphael, and Angel had different fathers. Noah, Bella, and David were all fathered by Kareem. Living together in a Lancaster apartment, the family faced further turmoil when allegations of abuse against Kareem surfaced. Despite evidence of injury to Heather's youngest son, law enforcement failed to pursue charges against Kareem, leaving the children vulnerable to continued harm. The investigation into the family concluded without locating and interviewing Kareem, despite suspicions of his regular presence at the home. Furthermore, DCFS workers failed to adhere to departmental rules mandating contact with Kareem's other children or their mothers, disregarding restraining orders against him. Heather disclosed that Kareem had begun mistreating her as well, signaling a concerning escalation of his behavior. While a case was opened in dependency court for one of the siblings, Anthony and the other children in the household were overlooked. During this time, a DCFS caseworker, Anna Shortino, observed visible marks and bruises on the sibling's face and arm. Heather attributed these injuries to a fall in the shower, but the circumstances raised serious concerns about the safety of the children in the household. On June 12, 2015, Ms. Shortino called the hotline and said she had doubts about the claim but wanted it recorded to cover themselves. The case was closed as unsubstantiated. Even though more physical abuse was suspected, the guidelines required sending the allegation to the police for investigation. Deputy Billy Cox, assigned to the case, admitted to not contacting Heather or Kareem. He said it was common practice to just pass along referrals from social workers without investigating properly. By September 2015, Anthony was at Lincoln Elementary School, where the vice principal, Miss Groh, heard troubling things from him. Anthony said his mother beat him, locked him in a room without basic necessities, and made him kneel on uncooked rice until he bled. He also described a punishment called the captain's chair, where he had to squat with his arms outstretched for a long time. Shocked by what she heard, Miss Groh called the hotline after Anthony shared that he moved out of his home because of the abuse. David Barron recounted hearing about the captain's chair's punishment from the children during a visit to his home. They described it as a strength-building exercise where they had to kneel against a wall for extended periods. However, David recognized it could also be used as a form of discipline, especially if imposed for long durations. Additionally, the children disclosed being locked in their rooms for hours on end and enduring physical abuse from Kareem, Heather's boyfriend. They shared alarming incidents, including being whipped with a belt and witnessing their younger sibling being dangled upside down from a staircase. Concerned for their safety, David and his wife Maria intervened when Heather attempted to take the children. They called 911, prompting a response from Sheriff's Deputy Michael Gallardo. After speaking with the children, Deputy Gallardo was deeply troubled by their accounts of abuse and decided not to release them to Heather. Instead, he arranged for them to stay with David temporarily. The next day, David personally contacted the hotline to report the children's distressing experiences, including being confined to a room for so long that they soiled themselves out of fear of Kareem's anger. The children revealed harrowing details of their mistreatment, including incidents where Kareem threw dirty diapers at them, slammed them into walls, and dragged one of Anthony's half-brothers by the ear, leaving visible injuries. They described enduring extreme hunger, to the point of hoarding food out of desperation. When asked about the duration of these abuses, the children responded, 1,000 weeks, indicating that the torment had been ongoing for an extensive period. David, deeply concerned for the children's welfare, reported disturbing behavior exhibited by Heather, including self-harm in front of the children and expressing suicidal thoughts. He also expressed fear of Kareem, alleging that he was a member of the MS-13 gang and apprehensive about his potential actions. Describing Kareem's treatment of the children, David recounted how Kareem admitted to mistreating them simply because he didn't like them. Kareem would confine them to their rooms, physically assault them, and even hang one child upside down by the ankles, threatening to drop him. David emphasized the danger posed by such actions, fearing for the child's safety. David discovered the abuse recently, but believed it had been ongoing for months. The children were intimidated into silence, warned of dire consequences if they spoke out. David meticulously interviewed each child separately to ensure their stories aligned, uncovering consistent accounts of neglect, cold showers, and physical abuse. Destiny bravely spoke out about Kareem's abuse, recounting how he threw dirty diapers at their heads and warned them of repercussions if they disclosed the abuse. Despite Destiny's courage, Heather vehemently denied the allegations and pressured her daughter to retract her statement. When Destiny insisted on telling the truth to the police, Heather reacted by grounding her and locking her in her room, attempting to silence her. Following these revelations, DCFS caseworker Ikea Vernon met with Anthony at his aunt and uncle's home. Anthony disclosed the abuse he endured, expressing his desire to stay with his aunt and uncle, away from Heather's mistreatment. However, during a subsequent meeting with Hathaway Sycamore's counselors, they expressed support for Heather's parenting, claiming they had never heard any reports of abuse or neglect from the children. Despite Anthony's plea and the concerning reports, Ikea Vernon hesitated to intervene solely based on the children's accounts. When Anthony's uncle and aunt sought answers from DCFS, they were turned away and informed that only Heather could provide information. Unaware of their options, they left without pursuing further action. Regrettably, Heather retained her parental rights and brought her children home at the end of September 2015, despite the ongoing concerns about their safety and well-being. According to Ikea Vernon, she met with Anthony at Lincoln Elementary, where he mentioned that his mother had started to act nicer and no longer locked the bedroom door. A month later, Anthony and his siblings retracted their previous allegations against Heather and Kareem, prompting Ikea Vernon to mark the allegations as unsubstantiated despite earlier reports from various sources. Ms. Vernon and her supervisor decided against further intervention, citing the children's recantation, unaware of the common phenomenon of victims retracting their accounts under pressure. The following month, Barbara Dixon and Hathaway Sycamores concluded their involvement with the family. However, DCFS remained involved in the Bear and Leva household. On April 28, 2016, Mildred Blue, a teacher at a battered women's shelter where Heather sought assistance, reported to the hotline about the children arriving with bruises and being forced to fight each other by Kareem. Despite these alarming reports, DCFS caseworkers and Sheriff's Deputy Billy Cox decided not to follow up, disregarding their own department policies. Several hotline calls regarding Anthony's family were marked as unsubstantiated throughout the years, and Anthony and his siblings remained in their mother's care. In late 2016, Heather severed ties with family members and educators who made accusations against her. Meanwhile, Anthony thrived at El Dorado Elementary, displaying exceptional academic and emotional maturity. His teacher, Harmony Bell, described him as kind, considerate, and a joy to have in class. Anthony cherished their bond, wishing for her presence in his future academic milestones. Sadly, Anthony's promising future was cut short. Tragically, he never made it to 6th grade or had the chance to see Miss Bell again. On June 18th, Anthony allegedly disclosed to his mother that he liked boys, a courageous act noted by his Aunt Maria. However, Heather later informed a DCFS caseworker that Kareem overheard the conversation. The following night, Kareem subjected Anthony to horrific abuse, He repeatedly dropped him on his head, whipped him with a belt and cord, slammed him into furniture, starved him, poured hot sauce down his throat, and denied him access to the bathroom. On June 20th, 2018, Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies responded to a 911 call from Heather around 12:15 in the afternoon. They found Anthony unresponsive inside the apartment, having allegedly sustained injuries from a fall. Paramedics rushed him to Antelope Valley Hospital in critical condition. Upon learning of Anthony's condition, his Aunt Maria rushed to the hospital. Heather initially hesitated to allow Maria to see Anthony, but Maria pleaded with her on her hands and knees, expressing regret for reporting her to DCFS. Eventually, Heather relented, and Maria found Anthony unconscious and on a ventilator, his face expressionless, held in place by a neck brace, with sensors monitoring his brain activity, indicating severe damage. Anthony Nolan Ávalos, only 10 years old, tragically passed away on June 21st, 2018, as a result of the horrifying abuse he endured. He stood at just 4 feet 6 inches tall and weighed a mere 77 pounds. His tiny body bore the scars of unspeakable cruelty, cuts, bruises, and cigarette burns. Severely malnourished and dehydrated, his veins had collapsed, necessitating emergency personnel to drill into his tibia to administer an IV. Anthony suffered from a brain bleed and traumatic brain injury due to the extent of his injuries. Regrettably, it took Anthony's death for DCFS to intervene and remove his 6 other siblings from Heather's care. Heather Barron, 29, and Kareem Leyva, 32, were arrested on June 20th, 2018. They faced charges of homicide, torture, and child abuse, including the alleged beating of one of Anthony's younger brothers. Kareem faced an additional charge of causing death due to child abuse. During the investigation, disturbing evidence emerged from Heather's apartment, including blood stains, locks on the outside of the children's bedroom doors, a bloodied belt in a hamper, and bottles of hot sauce near Anthony's bed. Additionally, a pile of uncooked rice was discovered, likely connected to the abusive punishment inflicted upon Anthony. During her interrogation, Heather displayed manipulative behavior reminiscent of another notorious case, that of Pearl Fernandez. Despite the gravity of the accusations against her, Heather attempted to control the narrative, deflecting questions and portraying herself as the victim, demonstrating a chilling similarity to Fernandez's demeanor during her own interrogation. According to District Attorney Hatami, Heather's behavior paralleled that of Pearl Fernandez, a chilling comparison that underscores the severity of Anthony's case. Subsequently, individuals involved were indicted by a Los Angeles County grand jury in October of 2018. During the trial, Anthony's 8-year-old sister Destiny and 7-year-old brother Raphael gave harrowing testimonies. Raphael recounted being coerced by his mother and Kareem to wrestle Anthony until he harmed him, often under their watchful eyes. He revealed that the children were forced to fight each other as a form of punishment, and eating was considered a privilege they had to earn. If they urinated while locked in a room, Kareem would forcefully push their faces into the puddle, sometimes using a shirt to stifle their cries. Destiny corroborated Raphael's account, adding that Kareem would also instruct them to physically harm Anthony or each other. They were subjected to prolonged periods of kneeling as punishment, sometimes with heavy weights atop their shoulders. Food was frequently withheld, and an alarm was installed on their bedroom door to prevent them from sneaking out for sustenance. Punishments escalated to include kneeling on rice with pressure applied to their knees, causing them to bleed. Authorities allege that in the final days of his life, Anthony endured a barrage of cruel punishments, including having hot sauce poured on his face, being whipped with a belt, and being repeatedly dropped on his head after being held upside down. On March 6, 2019, a verdict was reached in the trial of Heather Maxine Barron and Kareem Ernesto Leyva. The decision was announced by Superior Court Judge Sam Oda on the following afternoon. Both defendants were found guilty of first-degree homicide with a special circumstance involving the infliction of torture. The court found defendant Kareem Ernesto Leyva guilty of first-degree murder under a theory of torture murder, along with the special circumstance allegation pursuant to Penal Code Section 190.2 subdivision of paragraph 18. Similarly, the court found defendant Heather Maxine Barron guilty of first-degree murder under a theory of torture murder, also with the special circumstance allegation found to be true. The guilty verdicts were primarily established through various pieces of evidence presented during the trial, including medical evidence, testimonies of doctors, photographic and documentary exhibits, Leyva's own admissions, his flight from the apartment when 911 was called, and self-inflicted harm observed during his interview. During the sentencing 4 years later, Heather Maxine Barron listened as several of Anthony's grieving family members delivered emotional victim impact statements. They expressed profound grief and anger, blaming Heather for allowing Leyva into their lives and failing to protect them. They also addressed Leyva directly, condemning him for his actions and holding him responsible for Anthony's tragic death. In a poignant and heart-wrenching testimony, family members expressed their profound pain and loss over the tragic events surrounding Anthony Nolan Ávalos. One family member courageously spoke out, highlighting the failure to protect Anthony and the siblings from unimaginable harm. The deep sense of betrayal was evident as they recounted how their trust was shattered by those who were supposed to care for them. They expressed a mix of fear, anger, and a sense of liberation, acknowledging that they were finally free from the torture they endured. Matthew Barron, Anthony's 8-year-old cousin, shared his memories in a touching tribute. He lamented not being able to remember more of Anthony, relying only on photos and family stories to piece together a picture of a cousin full of life and love. Matthew expressed his sadness at never getting the chance to grow up with Anthony, to learn from him, and to create lasting memories together. He conveyed his anger and sense of injustice towards Heather, whom he regarded as responsible for taking Anthony away. The emotional weight of the situation was further amplified by the testimony of Anthony's siblings. They spoke of their deep bond with Anthony, describing him as a beacon of joy in their lives. His absence left a profound void, and they mourned not just the loss of their brother, but the loss of their own childhood innocence. They expressed a wish to turn back time, to speak up and change the course of events, highlighting the lasting impact of their traumatic experiences. In a significant legal outcome, Heather Maxine Barron and Kareem Ernesto Leiva were sentenced to life in prison without parole, escaping the death penalty due to a policy change by Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon. Additionally, Anthony's father, Victor, and his siblings received a substantial settlement from Los Angeles County, acknowledging the failures in protecting Anthony. The community's response to Anthony's tragic death was marked by protests and calls for accountability. Spearheaded by Anthony's family and District Attorney Hatami, they sought to challenge the perceived leniency of the justice system and advocate for victims' rights. These protests, joined by the family of Gabriel Fernandez, another victim of similar circumstances, were held in various locations, including Samuel Park in Palmdale and Sonora Patio Grill in Lancaster. Anthony's life was commemorated in a funeral service at St. Junipero's Sarah Parish in Quartz Hill, California, on July 20, 2018. His father, Victor, participated as a pallbearer, laying his son to rest in a small blue casket at the Good Shepherd Catholic Cemetery in Lancaster. Anthony's headstone, adorned with the image of a sleeping angel and an inscription, is a lasting tribute to his memory. You don't have to have superpowers to be a superhero. As we close the chapter on Anthony's heartbreaking story, we're reminded of the countless others who suffer in silence daily. But with your support and advocacy, we can shine a light on their plight and work towards a future where no child endures such pain. Join us as we continue to uncover the truth, seek justice, and bring hope to those who need it most. Together, we can make a difference. Stay tuned for more stories, cases, and ways to impact positively. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.